He's better off without you, she said. And the worst part? My husband didn't disagree. I wish I could say I argued, that I shouted, cried, defended myself, but all I did was stand there, frozen, holding a casserole dish I'd just pulled from the oven, wondering how my own kitchen suddenly felt like someone else's house. Lorraine always had a way of speaking like her words were law. Even that night, as she sat at my counter in her neat cream blouse, swirling white wine like she owned the place, I could tell this wasn't a casual conversation. This was a declaration. Mark stood beside her, silent, eyes fixed on the countertop. Christine, she said softly, I know you've been trying, but sometimes trying just isn't enough. I blinked, confused. Trying what? She smiled, that delicate, practiced kind of smile that never reaches the eyes. To be what he needs. But I think we all see now, he's better off without you. And Mark, my husband of 8 years, didn't say a single word. That's when something inside me cracked. If you'd asked me 6 months earlier, I would have told you my life was solid. Not glamorous, not perfect, but solid. I'm Christine Walker, 36, born and raised in Florida, and I used to believe in simple things, loyalty, effort, building a life together. Mark and I met at a friend's barbecue. He was the kind of man who made you feel seen, at least at first. Tall, kind eyes, laughed easily, talked about wanting a house with a screened porch and Sunday dinners with family. We built that dream together. Bought a little place near Sarasota, beige siding, palm tree out front, the kind of home that smells like sunscreen and cinnamon rolls on weekends. I worked in accounting, he worked in freight logistics. We had routines, lazy Saturday mornings, movie nights, Toby our rescue mutt snoring at our feet. Back then, even his mom seemed tolerable. Lorraine. She'd bring homemade pies, comment on my curtains, and pretend to care about my work. But there was always a chill underneath her warmth, like she was studying me, not connecting. When her condo flooded, I was the one who said she should stay with us. Just for a few weeks, I'd said. Mark looked relieved. Lorraine looked triumphant. A few weeks became 12 months. She was polite, helpful even, but somehow every compliment carried a little sting. You're so independent, Christine. I suppose not everyone's meant to be domestic. Or, Mark, you look tired. Maybe all that takeout isn't helping. She said things like that in passing, while folding laundry or pouring coffee, her tone sugar-sweet, her meaning sharp. Mark never corrected her. At first, I let it slide. I told myself she was adjusting. That her life had been uprooted. But slowly, I started noticing things, conversations that stopped when I entered a room, her hand on his shoulder when they laughed about old times, the way Mark's patience with me seemed to shorten by the week. Then came the small humiliations. She forgot to set a place for me at dinner once. Claimed she didn't hear me ask for salt. Bought new towels for the guest bathroom and hung them in our bathroom instead. Tiny things, easy to dismiss. But little by little, I could feel myself disappearing in my own home. That Tuesday night, the final unraveling began. I'd just come home from work, exhausted, hair damp from the rain, grocery bag on my arm. The house was quiet except for the hum of the fridge. Mark and Lorraine were sitting at the island, 2 wine glasses out, documents spread between them. Lorraine smiled first. Christine, she said. We've been talking. My eyes moved from her to the papers. Legal papers. What's this? I asked. Mark cleared his throat. I think you know things haven't been working. Working? My voice broke on the word. We're fine, Mark. We argue, sure, but... Lorraine interrupted smoothly. Sweetheart, denial won't fix this. He deserves peace. I turned to Mark. Peace from what? From me? He sighed. Christine, you're always keeping score. You pick fights over money, over my schedule, over mom. Because your mom lives here rent-free, Mark. And because I'm the one making sure bills get paid while she sits here judging everything I do. Lorraine's voice sharpened. You see? Always the victim. You twist everything. Mark rubbed his temples. This isn't healthy anymore. And that's when he said it, the line that shattered 8 years of marriage. She's right, Christine. Maybe I'd be better off without you. I didn't say another word. I walked to the sink, turned off the oven, and stared at the casserole burning inside. It smelled like everything I'd built, and everything I was about to lose. The next day, I went through the motions. Showered, dressed, went to work. Pretended I was okay. But when I came home that evening, I heard her voice drifting from the living room, sharp and familiar. He'll thank me one day, Lorraine was saying to someone on the phone. That woman never supported him. She just made him feel small. There was a pause, and then, with a chuckle, and thank goodness they never had kids. I'd have raised them myself. That line, that exact line, hit like a slap. Because she knew. She knew about the miscarriage. The one we never told anyone about. The one that nearly broke me. And she used it like ammunition. I stood there in the hallway, trembling, gripping the doorframe. When she finally hung up, I stepped into the room. She jumped slightly but recovered fast. Christine. You scared me. You're lying to him, I said quietly. She smiled, a slow, careful smile. No, dear. I'm saving him. You've turned him against me. She shrugged. If it was that easy, maybe he was never really yours. And then she picked up her wine glass and walked away. I think that was the moment I stopped being afraid of her, and started really seeing her for what she was. 2 nights later, I decided I couldn't live in limbo anymore. I sat down at my desk to start separating our accounts, something practical, something to focus on. Mark had insisted on handling the finances for months, saying it was easier. But as I logged into the joint account, my stomach twisted. Transactions I didn't recognize lined the screen, small transfers, disguised as household payments. $120, $300, $450, all tagged as home expenses or repairs. But the destinations were strange. PayPal, gaming apps, digital transfers. I clicked one open. The recipient name read, Lorraine M. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. But there were dozens of them, small withdrawals, month after month. Enough to add up to thousands. And the kicker? Most were made during work hours, times when I knew Mark was at the office. Which meant she was using his accounts. Or he was letting her. My vision blurred. I scrolled back further. There it was again, a $1,200 charge labeled renovation supplies. The memo line said, Golden Keys Casino Online. I stared at the screen, pulse pounding in my ears. Lorraine had been gambling with our money. With his money. And Mark, the man who said I was always keeping score, was too blind or too weak to notice. For a moment, all I could do was sit there in silence. Toby padded into the room, curled up at my feet. My chest felt tight, but not with grief anymore. With clarity. They thought they'd broken me. They thought I'd go quietly, sign the papers, and vanish. But what they didn't know, what Lorraine could never imagine, was that I noticed everything. I always had. And now, I finally had proof. The house was quiet as I closed the laptop. Outside, the Florida cicadas buzzed against the night air. I looked at my reflection in the dark screen, tired, yes, but not defeated. If Lorraine wanted a game, she'd just made her first mistake. Because I play slow. And I play to win. I didn't show up to Mark's birthday dinner. Lorraine had planned the whole thing like a coronation, catered food, champagne tower, probably those little cocktail napkins with gold foil that say something obnoxious like "Let's celebrate." She reminded me about it twice in the same week, even though we weren't speaking. It's just a small group, she said, her voice all sugary edge, just close friends and family. The kind of party where I used to bake the cake. The kind where I'd clean the house for hours while Lorraine followed behind me, rearranging everything I touched. Now she was hosting it herself, in the home I still legally owned, and didn't even bother pretending it was awkward. That morning, I packed a small overnight bag, locked Toby in the back seat, and left. I didn't call. I didn't text. I left a single envelope on the kitchen counter with a legal notice about the pending property valuation taped neatly to the front. Then I drove 3 hours north and checked into a pet-friendly cottage off a quiet road that smelled like orange blossoms and old wood. Later that night, Melanie texted me a video from her friend's friend, a caterer working the party. In the clip, Lorraine raised a glass of Prosecco and clinked it against Mark's with a smirk that looked practiced. "To fresh starts," she said. He laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. The group around them cheered like they were at a wedding. I watched that clip twice, then set the phone down slowly. Melanie watched me from the couch across the room, knees pulled up to her chest, face unreadable. "You okay?" she asked. I didn't answer right away. Then I looked up and said, "You ever watch someone dig their own grave and not even know it?" She blinked. "Is that what they're doing?" I nodded. "They just don't know I'm the one who handed them the shovel." The next morning, I called the bank. What I'd discovered in the joint account, the gambling charges, the sketchy transfers, was just the surface. I'd made copies of everything weeks earlier, slipped them into a manila folder marked "Summer Tax Docs," and stored them in the back of my old work tote. I'd kept it quiet, even from Melanie, because the more invisible I became, the easier it was to move freely. When the bank manager asked me why I was separating the accounts, I told her simply, "My husband is being misled by someone in the household, and I don't plan on covering the fallout." Her expression didn't change, but she gave me a little nod of solidarity. By the time I left, every auto payment, shared access point, and emergency backup card tied to my name had been disabled. I didn't need to yell or slam any doors. All I needed was a signature and 20 minutes. Over the next 10 days, I disappeared in plain sight. I didn't post anything online. I didn't update my location. I let people assume what they wanted to assume. When one of Mark's coworkers, Julie, ran into me at the farmer's market and did that awkward half-smile people do when they think you've been publicly humiliated, I gave her nothing. "Oh wow," she said, trying to sound casual, "Mark said you'd moved out of state to figure things out." I stared at her for a long moment, then smiled politely. "Tell him I figured something out, all right." I walked away before she could respond, but I made sure she had enough to wonder about. I didn't need anyone's sympathy. I just needed them off my trail. Meanwhile, Lorraine was thriving. At least, that's what she wanted people to believe. A week after the party, she posted a photo on her Facebook page, her holding a wine glass on the back patio, the caption reading, "Nothing like family to remind you what love really looks like." She'd blocked me months earlier, but Melanie's cousin sent me a screenshot. I stared at that line, "What love really looks like," and thought about the way Lorraine used to correct the way I folded towels. How she told Mark I wasn't naturally maternal just weeks after I miscarried. How she'd once said, in front of a group of guests, that she wasn't worried about grandkids because some women just aren't built for motherhood, and that's okay. The kind of cruelty that slips beneath the skin, just enough to sting but never quite bleed. I started therapy the following Monday. The woman, Dr. Keating, was calm and soft-voiced with gray-streaked hair and a notepad she barely used. I sat on her leather chair and told her about the way I used to walk on eggshells in my own kitchen. How Lorraine always seemed to say the right thing to the wrong person, how Mark started pulling away slowly, not with anger, but with apathy. He didn't fall out of love with me, I told her. He just decided it was easier to believe someone else's version of me. Dr. Keating nodded slowly and said, "And when someone decides to stop seeing you clearly, it doesn't matter how brightly you shine." I didn't cry. But I felt something shift. I wasn't there to be soothed. I was there to sharpen my thinking. And she helped with that. One afternoon, I sat on Melanie's back porch with Toby asleep at my feet and a legal pad in my lap. I wasn't making a plan exactly, not yet, but I was writing down every piece of leverage I had. Copies of the joint account statements. Login timestamps. Lorraine's name on multiple gambling platforms. Mark's direct transfers labeled utilities that never went to a single power company. I wasn't sure what I'd do with it all yet, but every time I wrote something down, I felt steadier. Like I was no longer just reacting. Like I was finally steering. Melanie noticed the shift before I said a word. One night, she brought out a second glass of wine and handed it to me without asking. "You know," she said carefully, "you've got that look again." I glanced up. "What look?" She smiled. "The one you used to get when you were about to win an argument but wanted the other person to walk into it first." I didn't smile, but I felt a little flicker of something close. "People think I've moved on," I said. Melanie tilted her head. "And?" I stared straight ahead. "They're not entirely wrong." She leaned in just slightly. "But they're not entirely right either, are they?" I looked her in the eye, calm as anything, and said, "Not even close." The next day, Mark showed up. It was almost dusk. I'd just come in from walking Toby when I saw his car in the driveway, the same silver Nissan he'd been driving since our 3rd year of marriage. I didn't go out right away. I stood by the window and watched him sit there for a minute, engine running, looking like a man who wasn't sure if he'd come to apologize or defend himself. Eventually, I stepped onto the porch. He got out of the car slowly, like we were strangers meeting after years apart. "Hey," he said. I didn't respond. I waited. "You look different," he added. I nodded. "I am." He shifted his weight. "I didn't expect you to vanish like that." My jaw tensed. "You vanished first, Mark." I just finally stopped chasing. His mouth opened like he wanted to argue, but then he sighed. "I don't want this to turn ugly." I took a step down the porch steps and looked him right in the eye. "You already turned it ugly. You just didn't do it loud." He looked hurt, but not surprised. "I didn't know about the account stuff." "I swear, I didn't." I tilted my head slightly. "Then maybe you should start reading your own statements." He exhaled slowly. "I didn't mean to let it get like this." I crossed my arms. "You didn't mean to. That's your whole problem." He nodded faintly and turned to leave. As he reached the car, I said one last thing, not loudly, not with heat, just evenly. "Enjoy it while it lasts." He turned, confused. "What's that supposed to mean?" I didn't answer. He thought I meant the sunlight fading behind the trees. But something far more permanent was about to go dark. It started with a test. I didn't expect it to work, but I needed to know if they were still sloppy. So I sent an email, just a casual note to Mark's assistant Trina. I worded it like a clueless ex-wife request, asking if she could resend last year's household budget summary for tax season. I was polite, vague, and very intentionally CC'd Mark's old work email, the one I knew he barely checked anymore. 2 days later, Trina replied, not just with the files I'd asked for, but with an entire batch of internal statements and notes clearly meant for someone else. She must have assumed I was still looped in or thought Mark had okayed it. Either way, I had it, spreadsheets with payment dates, flagged transactions, and a brief memo at the top that chilled me. "Let me know if Lorraine wants to adjust the card limits again before we close out Q3. That one sentence told me everything. Lorraine wasn't just spending Mark's money, she was issuing orders. And no one had stopped her. I didn't open the attachments right away. I let them sit there for a night, glowing in my inbox like a loaded trap. Then the next morning, I forwarded them to my personal archive and printed 2 copies, one for me, one for my attorney. I read every line like scripture. Casino payments camouflaged as home expenses. Personal Venmo charges disguised as house maintenance. Mark's signature used in transactions that matched Lorraine's travel weekends. All of it easy to miss if you weren't looking. But I'd started looking months ago. And now I was ready to act. That afternoon, I drove to meet Evan, my dad's friend and a financial investigator who owed my family a favor. We sat in the back corner of a strip mall coffee shop, both of us hunched over a folder that looked harmless to anyone passing by. But the contents were explosive. She didn't even try to cover her tracks, he said, tapping the records. There's no separation between her personal and Mark's accounts. You've got overlap, you've got frequency, you've got motive. I looked him dead in the eye and said, I just need to make it undeniable. He nodded. You're already halfway there. Back at Melanie's, I laid everything out on the guest bed. Files. Screenshots. Bank statements. Timeline charts. I built it like a case, not a grudge, and maybe that's why it felt so good. I wasn't reacting. I wasn't lashing out. I was documenting everything they never thought I'd notice. Every charge that didn't belong. Every lie dressed up as a favor. Every time Lorraine said, I'm just helping him. What she really meant was, I'm helping myself. I didn't cry anymore. I didn't get angry. What I felt was sharper than either. I'd spent years trying to be the easy daughter-in-law, the one who kept the peace, who smoothed over Mark's silences and Lorraine's barbs with polite laughter and store-bought pies. I'd lost count of how many times I cleaned the kitchen after one of her dinners while she told stories about Mark's childhood like I wasn't even in the room. But now? Now I had her on record using a man's name to fund her habit, and not just any man, but her own son. And I had the receipts. They, of course, had no idea. Lorraine was still busy posting wineglass selfies and inspirational quotes about choosing joy. Mutual friends forwarded me her latest caption, some people let go. Some people rise above. Guess which one I am? The photo showed her on our back patio, in a new chair that wasn't there 6 months ago. I looked it up. Teakwood. Over $3,000. Bought using a house account withdrawal I'd found on one of the statements. And suddenly, that quote made sense. She wasn't rising above. She was just shopping with someone else's money. I sent the full packet to my attorney and asked him to start preparing a financial freeze motion on all joint assets. He didn't hesitate. They won't see this coming, he said. I nodded. Good. I'm tired of being predictable. The plan was already in motion. But I needed one more thing before I pulled the trigger. I needed to know they still thought they'd won. So I let myself be seen. I went into town and shopped at a small boutique Lorraine frequented. I knew she might be there, it was her style, overpriced candles and linen tunics she claimed were timeless. I found her near the front counter, mid-conversation with a friend, voice raised just loud enough for me to catch. Christine's been quiet because she knows she can't compete with family. Her friend laughed in that snide, complicit way women do when they'd picked a side. I stepped up to the scarf rack without looking at them. Lorraine caught my reflection in the mirror and froze, just for a second. Then she turned toward me with that carefully curated smirk. Christine, she said, almost sing-song. Still in town, I see. I turned to face her, calm and unreadable. I never left. She tilted her head. Mark said you were off finding yourself. I took a breath and replied, I did. Turns out I was right where I left myself, behind a stack of financial records with your name all over them. Her smile cracked, just slightly. You don't know what you're talking about. I took a step closer, lowered my voice. You should be very careful with that sentence, Lorraine. Especially if you've been signing off on account changes you don't own. She blinked hard. You have no proof. I leaned in, let her smell the calm on me. You're betting on that? Let's see how far you get. Then I turned, paid for my tea towel, and walked out. I didn't look back. But I felt her eyes burning holes in the back of my jacket the whole way. A few days later, Mark called. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail, voice tight, pacing, full of half-truths and nervous energy. Christine, look, we really need to talk. I didn't realize some of the stuff she was doing. If you could just hold off on anything formal, maybe we could figure this out like adults. I saved the message, added it to the file. I didn't call him back. Instead, I drove to my lawyer's office, signed the financial motion paperwork, and watched as he faxed a freeze order to every institution tied to our joint accounts. The smile that spread across my face didn't feel vengeful. It felt deserved. Later that week, I ran into Mark in the parking lot outside the courthouse, purely by chance. He looked thinner than I remembered. More tired. He started walking toward me, but I held up a hand. Don't, I said calmly. He stopped, but he didn't leave. This doesn't have to be ugly, he said. I tilted my head. Mark, you stood in our kitchen and told me you'd be better off without me. Now I'm just giving you what you asked for. He looked down. She told me you were draining our savings. I didn't laugh, but I smiled. And you believed her? He hesitated. She showed me statements. I nodded. The ones she edited? The ones she pulled from a dummy account she set up in your name? His mouth opened, but no sound came out. I stepped past him. You trusted the wrong person. Again. Then I paused. And I didn't even have to lie to get you to sign the papers. I just had to wait. The final straw came on a random Tuesday. My attorney forwarded a message from their side. Lorraine had contacted Mark's legal rep in a panic, asking if there was any way to undo the freeze. Apparently she'd tried to book a weekend trip for herself and a few friends and gotten declined. The hotel manager had to run her card twice before pulling her aside. Word spread fast in small towns. By Thursday, I got a text from a neighbor, everything okay? Mark and his mom looked really tense outside the house today. I didn't reply. But I smiled. That weekend, I went into the boutique again. The same clerk was there. She looked nervous, like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to talk to me. I picked up a scarf, walked to the counter, and as she rang it up, I asked, did Lorraine ever buy that patio set she was raving about? The girl paused. She did, she said slowly, but last week she came in and asked if she could return some of it. Said it was not the right fit. I raised an eyebrow. Huh. Wonder what changed. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. As I stepped out of the store, sunlight pouring down the sidewalk, I passed Lorraine walking in with a forced smile and sunglasses too large for her face. Her shoulders were tight. Her energy off. I didn't stop. I just said, loud enough for her to hear, I told you, receipts don't lie. And for once, she didn't say a word. Lorraine's garden party was supposed to be her victory lap. I wasn't invited, of course, but I didn't need to be there to know exactly how it looked. The photos told the story: floral centerpieces, delicate finger foods, a banner stretched across the backyard fence that read "New Beginnings" in gold script. I almost laughed when I saw it. She stood in the middle of the yard, wine glass raised high, dressed in white like she was celebrating her own canonization. Mark was beside her in a crisp shirt that didn't fit his skin tone, smiling that hollow smile he used when he wanted to convince people he was fine. They looked like a family reborn, the dust swept neatly under the rug, the mess I supposedly caused long forgotten. I let them have their afternoon. Because by Monday, the truth would land on their doorstep, certified, undeniable, and signed in ink. The first envelope arrived the very next morning. It was the notice of the extended financial freeze, delivered directly to the house they still called home. The second envelope followed within hours, a letter from my attorney, formally notifying them of the legal motion to recover marital assets, damages, and full property rights. Every receipt, every timestamp, every transfer with Lorraine's name attached was included in that packet. It was the most expensive piece of mail she'd ever receive, and she had to sign for it herself. I pictured her expression when she saw her own name printed beside the words misappropriation of funds. Probably that same tight smile she wore when she was about to lose control but refused to admit it. What I hadn't expected, though, was how fast it would unravel after that. A friend of mine from the bank called first. She told me Lorraine had stormed into the branch, loud enough to draw attention from the tellers, demanding to speak to a manager about a misunderstanding. She wanted the freeze reversed, called it a clerical error. But when they explained that the account was under joint investigation and she no longer had authority, she turned pale and started whispering to herself, she couldn't. The friend said Lorraine left without finishing her sentence, but the look on her face said everything. She wasn't angry, she was scared. That night, the first photo disappeared from her Facebook page. Then another. And another. By Wednesday, the entire party album was gone. I heard from Melanie that one of the guests mentioned Lorraine had been unwell during the last hour of the party, that she'd gotten a call, turned gray, and excused herself early. Apparently, she'd locked herself in the bathroom for 15 minutes and came out looking like she'd swallowed glass. I didn't know if it was the moment the legal notice arrived or the bank's automated alert, but either way, the party ended with more silence than applause. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt finished. The following morning, I received an email from Evan, the financial investigator who'd helped me build the case. Audit confirmed, it said. Full record of gambling transactions verified. IRS notified. I read it twice, then closed my laptop and exhaled. For the first time in a year, the air felt breathable. There was nothing left for me to do. I'd built the truth, brick by brick, and now it was standing on its own. 2 days later, Mark showed up at my lawyer's office unannounced. He didn't ask to see me, but he left a folder with my name on it. Inside were 2 checks, one for half the value of the house, the other covering all my legal fees. There was also a note, handwritten in the careful, deliberate script he used when he wanted to sound sincere. Christine. I know now how wrong I was. You didn't deserve what happened. I let her twist things until I couldn't tell the difference between what was real and what was convenient. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope this helps you start fresh. Mark. I sat with that letter for a long time. Not because it moved me, but because it confirmed something I'd already accepted. He finally saw it, all of it, but only after everything had been stripped away. And that was his punishment, really. To see clearly too late. I told my attorney to accept the payment, but I didn't write back. You can't have closure with someone who only apologizes once you've stopped needing it. The hearing came the next week. Lorraine tried to play the part of the wounded matriarch, calm and innocent, her voice trembling as she spoke about how family misunderstandings shouldn't be turned into witch hunts. But the judge wasn't moved. My attorney presented evidence, the signed withdrawals, the overlapping accounts, the gambling receipts, and each document stripped away another layer of her practiced charm. At one point, she blurted out, "He told me it was fine." And immediately realized the mistake. The courtroom went still. The judge leaned forward and asked, "Who told you?" Lorraine hesitated, then whispered, "My son." The judge's tone was calm but cutting. "So you acknowledge you were using his money?" She didn't answer. She didn't have to. When the ruling came down, it was clean and complete. The court granted me full ownership of the house and restitution for the misused funds. Lorraine was barred from accessing any shared accounts. Mark's financial oversight was officially separated, with monitoring required for any future transactions involving family property. I won't lie, when the gavel hit the desk, I felt a pulse of satisfaction that went straight through me. Not because I wanted revenge anymore, but because the truth had finally, unmistakably, been recorded. As I walked out of the courthouse, Lorraine was standing near her car, phone in hand, her face pale and furious. She saw me and started toward me, but the words seemed to die in her throat before they reached me. I stopped, let her close the distance by a few steps, and waited. "You've ruined everything," she hissed finally, low and sharp. I met her eyes, steady and unshaken. "No, Lorraine. You did that all by yourself. I just stopped cleaning up after you." She froze, mouth open but no sound coming out. Her hand trembled slightly as she clutched her purse. I stepped past her without looking back. The sound of her door slamming echoed across the parking lot. That night, I went to the house one last time. The keys felt cold in my hand. Inside, everything smelled faintly of lavender and lemon cleaner, her scent, lingering. I walked through each room, not as someone mourning, but as someone reclaiming. The kitchen, where she'd once told me I used too much salt. The living room, where Mark and I hung our first Christmas lights together. The back porch, where I'd once overheard her whisper, "He's better off without her." I stood there for a long time, letting that memory play out like an old film. And then I laughed, not bitterly, but softly, because she'd been right, just not in the way she thought. When I sold the house a month later, I didn't feel loss. I felt weightless. I moved into a small bungalow near the coast, the kind of place Lorraine would have called too impractical. It had uneven floors and sea air that clung to everything, but every inch of it was mine. I adopted another rescue dog, learned to cook for one, started volunteering at a literacy center. My days were quiet, honest, and mine alone. Sometimes people asked me if I ever missed that old life, the house, the marriage, the family dinners. And I told them the truth, I missed the person I thought I was supposed to be. But not the woman who spent years walking on eggshells for people who couldn't see her worth. Mark sent one more letter 6 months later. No check this time, just words. "I hope you're happy," he wrote. I folded it neatly, slid it into a drawer, and smiled. Because I was. Lorraine never contacted me again. Last I heard, she sold her car, downsized, and started attending a local support group for women rebuilding after loss. I didn't feel joy in that. Only distance. Some people only learn humility when they have no audience left to impress. Sometimes, late at night, I think back to the first time she said it, the words that burned themselves into my mind and set everything in motion. "He's better off without you." For years, they haunted me like a curse. Now they feel like a prophecy she accidentally gave me. Because she was right, he was better off without me. And I was better off without both of them. In the end, she lost her control, and I found my peace. They tried to erase me. All they did was give me a clean page. And this time I wrote the ending myself.